It's a good question, but I might ask you one first, which is before we get to that, I was wondering if you can explain to me, because I know you know a bit about the research about online therapy, especially compared to in person. So if a person is thinking about therapy and they're not sure about online or in person, perhaps they're in an area where services are hard to find. They might be thinking, is it really a value? Like, is online therapy something that's actually effective compared to in person? So I thought maybe perhaps before we went to how it is with us specifically, maybe you could talk to, is it of value?
It's a really good question. Yeah, and actually from the get-go, I suppose the first thing to say is yes. So for anybody who's interested, they could go to the Australian Institute for Family Studies. It's a great resource, lots of research there. And in that, at that organisation, there's a huge piece of research, and it's a meta-analysis of other research that clearly demonstrates that online therapy is as efficacious, so it's just as effective and just as useful as in-person therapy. So that's the broad headline. Now, that said, the caveat is that depends from person to person. This is a choice that you will make, depending on how you feel about this and how you want to engage with your therapist. But broadly, it is as efficacious. And with that as well, it brings some benefits. So, as you know, and as we know, families and lead busy lives. People lead busy lives. So actually, it can make things a little bit more accessible. Sometimes it's just really difficult to get to a location to see a therapist. So actually, an online session might work much better, and that reduces the stress and the strain of getting in and out of locations. As a systemic therapist and family therapist, sometimes it's practically difficult to get various people into one location. Well, if we've all got access to the internet, then we can all meet remotely via Zoom, and we can still structure sessions in such ways. There can be some challenges. There's technical challenges and technical concerns that might pop up. We need to work hard to speak to each other, and we need to be able to manage how we're clarifying information. But these are things that we can overcome, and our processes and our structures that I know we'll go through in a moment address some of those issues. So yes, it's efficacious, as efficacious. It's entirely dependent on how then each person, each individual wants to take up that opportunity and what's best for them. But if they do, the quality of that experience isn't diminished. Yeah,
and that's awesome, I guess, considering COVID and potential for, isolation, or, if one gets COVID, things like that, knowing that there's still an option there, I can imagine as well might be, anxiety reducing, knowing that therapy doesn't have to stop. You can still be supported even through this kind of weird time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned anxiety. For some people with where we consider generalized anxiety disorders, and people that are so anxious that actually even leaving the house is prohibitive for them, this provides an excellent opportunity to be able to engage and build up rapport and start to take small steps in addressing and thinking about how to reduce that anxiety and how to manage that anxiety so that people can engage in the wider world, which most people often they want to do still. So it's quite an invaluable tool, and that's speaking from experience as well over the last 2 years.
And I can imagine as well, for some people, they might feel more comfortable online than in person, sharing certain things, or being honest, whereas maybe in person they feel not able to do that. Is that something that you've found working with people in the past online?
Yeah, absolutely. In some instances, there is a degree of, I think what might be perceived as a barrier, but actually what it does is it feels more like a protected space. As people are watching this video now, they can see us both in two separate little boxes, although we're on one big screen. And I think it allows people the space to be in their space, to be able to say what they need to see without some of that emotive content, that some of that affect that might play out when people are close together. So it makes it a little bit more manageable. And I have seen that, and actually had families in the past who would prefer to continue sessions once they've experienced it online in this format, for that exact reason, that they feel they have more space to speak and to be heard.
Yeah, and safety, I guess, in their own familiar space versus maybe an unfamiliar spot. Yeah, okay, awesome. Thank you for that, Shane. So it sounds like that online therapy is a pretty good alternative, if not just as good, really on par with in-person therapy. Yeah, thank you for asking that.